So your Aunt Becky, bless her heart, wants to tell you a story about what happened to her at the bank on Thursday. So of course, she begins the story by telling you what she had for breakfast on Tuesday, and also you probably need to know about how she met the bank teller in 1988 when they were on the same cheerleading squad in high school. Don't be like Aunt Becky. So where should you begin your short story? This is something that a lot of writers struggle with. But here's the key. Don't include any parts of the story that aren't absolutely critical to your reader's understanding. A lot of writers want to include way too much backstory, but Kurt Vonnegut has a really helpful rule for this. Kurt Vonnegut has these 8 rules for writing short stories, and they're all fantastic. But the 5th one is this: start your story as close to the end as possible. So if you want to write a story about a man who's thinking about jumping off of a bridge, don't start with where he was born. Don't tell us about his whole childhood. Instead, start the story on the bridge. Bring us right into the moment of the story. A common mistake among new writers is to include way too much backstory. The fact is that your reader is smart. If you show them good clues, they're really good at putting together the pieces to figure out who your characters are. Your reader is so smart that if you show them good clues about who your character is, they're going to assemble a better backstory than you could tell them in 1,000 pages. Not only will the backstory be more complete, but it'll be more nuanced to that particular reader because they're going to bring their own experiences, people they know, things that they've done, and that's going to help inform them as to who this character is. The same is true for elaborate world building. When it comes to short stories, your goal is to show the world through carefully placed hints, dropping little seeds, and then let your reader put the pieces together. So just start telling the story. Show the pieces as you go along. Drop little hints and clues, and then trust your reader to put those pieces together. If I show you this picture of a couple getting married, where did they come from? Now, I haven't told you anything about them, but I'm guessing that you didn't assume that this man and this woman just materialized in this moment in time. In fact, if I gave you some time to look at this picture, you could probably assemble little clues about the choices they made, about the way that they're dressed and the style of their wedding, and you could start to assemble character traits and personality and even some of their backstory from this one finite moment in time. So this idea of starting the story as close to the end as possible can be used in story planning or in the revision process. Now, when you're thinking about the story that you want to tell and you have an idea for that story, if there's some critical moment that's going to happen in the story, ask yourself, how close to that moment can I begin the story? And then you'll weave in moments that happen before that as you go. Now, sometimes we don't really know what story we're telling until after we've put a draft together, right? We kind of have to find the story as we go. And that can be a normal part of the process. But after you've written that story, we need to ask this question. How much of the beginning of this story is unnecessary? How much can I remove to start as close to the end of the story as possible? Where does the action actually begin? And this is where we apply the writer's adage, kill your darlings. Which means that even though there was a paragraph that you really liked in that first section, or maybe some lines of dialogue that were really witty banter that you really appreciated, nonetheless, you have to remove those in order to honor the story as a whole. You kill those things that you love because it's going to make the story better. Now, this isn't to say that backstory isn't important. It just means that it doesn't always belong at the beginning of the story. If you think about it, the beginning of the story is when we most want to capture the reader's attention. And so we really don't want to begin right there with some boring details. Instead, we want to bring them into something that feels exciting or intense or thought-provoking. So rather than dumping a bunch of backstory or a bunch of world building on the first page of your story, just start where the story begins, and then you can weave in those elements of backstory and world building in ways that are natural and organic to the narrator's voice, or are natural to dialogue that the characters might actually share with each other. And sometimes you'll write backstory that's very important to the way that you write the story, but doesn't actually need to appear on the page. For instance, you may know an elaborate backstory about this man and woman that are characters in your story. And that elaborate backstory informs the way that you write their dialogue, possibly in ways that you couldn't even articulate. But because you know of the ways that they trust each other and because of the ways that they still carry insecurities and mistrust for each other, that's going to subtly change the way that you write their dialogue. It's going to change the way that you have them interact with each other. And even though you couldn't say, well, I made this change because the woman doesn't trust the man in this way, in your subconscious, it's going to affect the way that you write that dialogue, and it's going to make it richer and deeper. That depth that you've achieved isn't dependent on your reader knowing the backstory. So even though that backstory is only known to you, it's going to subtly make that dialogue and that description that much more interesting for your reader. And you never have to fill them in on that backstory for them to sense the richness that you brought to the text. So, when you're thinking about what backstory to include, here are 2 questions that you can ask. Does my reader need this information in order to understand the story I'm telling right now? Can this information be dropped in with little hints and clues that are natural to the narration or the dialogue? This will help you to decide what to include. There are times when a story requires an elaborate backstory. We need to develop something to depth so that the reader can fully appreciate what's happening in the present story moment. However, this is rare. In most cases, follow Kurt Vonnegut's rule. Start the story as close to the end as possible. You'll be surprised at how well your readers can keep up with what's happening, and you'll be surprised at the depth that they perceive from your characters for the backstory that only you know but haven't even shared. Start your story as close to the end as possible. Catch the reader in the act of the story, and then fill in the world building in the backstory with little hints and details as you go. Your readers are smart, and they probably don't need to know nearly as much as you think.